Have you ever sat down with a cup of coffee, looked at your bank statement, and wondered how those retirement years you planned so carefully for suddenly feel a little tighter than you expected? If that's hitting close to home, you're not alone. I've talked to so many folks over 60 who've worked hard, saved up, and dreamed of this chapter, only to find that money seems to slip through their fingers faster than they'd like. But here's the good news. It doesn't have to be that way. I'm so glad you're here with me today because we're going to dive into something that can help you hold on to that financial security you deserve. 5 money mistakes retirees often make that can throw things off track, and, more importantly, how to steer clear of them. Why does this matter so much? Well, after 60, we're not just living for today. We're making sure we've got enough to enjoy tomorrow, too. Maybe it's a trip to see the grandkids, fixing up the house, or just knowing you can cover the bills without a pit in your stomach. But little missteps, even ones we don't see coming, can chip away at that peace of mind. I've seen it happen, and I've learned from folks who've been there, smart, hardworking people who just didn't spot the pitfalls until it was too late. So, over the next little while, I'll walk you through 5 common slip-ups that can mess with your finances in retirement, and we'll figure out how to sidestep them together. Let's start with the first one, because it's something we've all been tempted by at some point. Picture this. You're finally free from the 9-to-5 grind, and it feels like the perfect time to treat yourself. Maybe a shiny new car, a big vacation, or even sprucing up the whole house. That urge to splurge right out of the gate is so real, and it's the first mistake a lot of retirees make, spending too much too soon. I get it. After years of saving, you want to enjoy the fruits of your labor. My buddy Tom, who's 64, told me he bought a boat the minute he retired, thought it'd be his ticket to adventure. But a year later, he was stressing over maintenance costs and docking fees, and his savings took a bigger hit than he'd planned. The trick here is to ease into the big spends. Give yourself a few months to settle into retirement, see what your day-to-day really costs, and then decide what's worth it. Maybe start with a smaller trip or a used car instead. Keep that nest egg safe while you figure out what you really need to feel happy. And that leads right into another trap that's so easy to fall into: not having a clear budget. When you're working, your paycheck kind of sets the rhythm, right? But in retirement, it's on you to call the shots, and without a plan, money can vanish before you know it. I remember chatting with my neighbor Linda, who's 67 now. She said she used to just wing it, pay the bills, spend what felt okay, and hope it all worked out. Then she sat down with a notebook, tracked her expenses for a month, and realized she was spending way more on little things like takeout and subscriptions than she thought. She started setting a simple budget. Nothing fancy, just a rough idea of what comes in from her pension and Social Security, and what she wants to spend on fun stuff versus necessities. It was like putting guardrails on her finances, and she says she sleeps better knowing she's in control. You can do the same. Grab a pen, jot down your must-haves and your nice-to-haves, and tweak it as you go. So, with those 2 under our belts, watching those early splurges and sketching out a budget, you're already starting to see how small shifts can protect what you've built. It's not about pinching pennies until it hurts. It's about making your money work for you so you can enjoy this time without worry. And there's another sneaky mistake that creeps up on retirees, one that's tied to how we think about what's coming down the road. Let's keep this going and talk about that next. All right, so we've got a handle on resisting that big spending spree right out of retirement and setting up a simple budget to keep things steady. Already, you're building a solid foundation to keep your finances safe. It's amazing how these little adjustments can give you that sense of control, isn't it? Now, let's talk about something else that trips up a lot of retirees. Something that sneaks in when we're not looking: ignoring inflation. I know it's not the most exciting word, but stick with me here. Prices don't stay still, even when your income might, and that can quietly eat away at your security if you're not ready for it. Think about how a loaf of bread or a tank of gas costs more now than it did 10 years ago. If your money's just sitting there, not keeping up, it's like watching it shrink without even realizing it. My friend Ray, who's 70 and still tinkering with his model trains, learned this the hard way. He'd parked most of his savings in a regular old bank account, figuring it was safe. But a few years in, he noticed his grocery bills creeping up, and that fixed amount he'd counted on wasn't stretching as far. He talked to a friend who knew a bit more about this stuff and started moving some of his money into things that could grow a little, like a low-risk investment or even a savings account with better interest. Nothing wild, just enough to keep pace with rising costs. You don't have to become a Wall Street whiz. Maybe chat with someone you trust, like a financial advisor, or look into something simple like a CD or bonds. The idea is to make sure your money's working at least a little, so it's there when you need it down the line. And while we're thinking about the long game, here's another mistake that ties right in: not planning for healthcare costs. Oh, I know. It's not fun to think about doctor visits or prescriptions when you'd rather be planning a fishing trip or a day in the garden. But healthcare can be one of the biggest curveballs in retirement, and pretending it won't happen can leave you scrambling. I remember my cousin Ellen, who's 65. She figured Medicare would cover everything when she retired. Then, she needed a new pair of glasses and some dental work, and suddenly she was dipping into savings she hadn't planned to touch. She started setting aside a small chunk each month, kind of like a rainy day fund just for health stuff, and it took the stress off. You can do that too. Maybe tuck away 50 or 100 a month, whatever fits. Or look into a supplemental plan if it makes sense for you. It's like giving yourself a safety net, so a surprise bill doesn't knock you off course. So, with inflation on your radar and a little cushion for healthcare in mind, you're starting to see how these pieces fit together to protect what you've got. It's not about living in fear of every penny. It's about being smart so you can relax and enjoy the good stuff. And there's one more habit retirees sometimes fall into that can really shake things up, especially when it comes to the people we care about most. Let's keep this rolling and dive into that next. So, we've tackled spending too much too soon, skipping a budget, ignoring inflation, and brushing off healthcare costs. Already, you're getting a clearer picture of how to keep your finances steady in retirement, right? It's all about those small, smart moves that add up to big peace of mind. Now, let's talk about one more mistake that can really throw a wrench in things, especially because it's wrapped up in love and good intentions: giving too much to family or friends. I know, this one's tricky. After 60, a lot of us want to help out. Maybe the kids need a hand with a down payment, or a grandkid's got college coming up. It feels good to be the one they can lean on, but if you're not careful, it can leave your own security wobbling. Take my pal George, for instance. He's 68 and the kindest guy you'll meet. When his daughter hit a rough patch a few years back, he didn't hesitate to hand over a big chunk of his savings to help her get back on her feet. Trouble was, he didn't figure out how it'd affect him long term, and now he's stretching his budget thinner than he'd like. He's still smiling, but he told me he wishes he'd set some limits. The fix here isn't saying no to everyone. It's about saying yes in a way that keeps you safe too. Maybe set a cap on what you can give, like a gift you'd feel good about but won't miss too much, or offer help in other ways, like watching the grandkids or sharing advice. George started doing that, and he says it's a weight off his shoulders. He's still there for his family, just not at the cost of his own future. And while we're on this, it's worth thinking about how all these choices weave together. You've got this picture now, easing into retirement spending, keeping a budget, watching out for inflation, saving for healthcare, and balancing generosity with your own needs. It's like building a little fortress around your finances, not because you're scared, but because you want to enjoy this time without that nagging worry in the back of your mind. I think of folks like Tom, Linda, Ray, Ellen, and George. Each one figured out where they stumbled and turned it around. You can do that too. Maybe start by picking one thing, like jotting down a rough budget this week or checking where your savings are sitting, and see how it feels. What's so great about this is, it's not about deprivation. It's about making sure you've got enough to live the way you want. Whether that's a quiet morning with a good book, a trip to see the family, or just knowing the bills are covered. I'd love to hear what you think. Have you ever run into one of these bumps? Or do you have a trick that's worked for you? Drop a comment below and let's chat about it. I'm always learning from you all. If this hit home, give the video a thumbs up. It means the world. And hit that subscribe button so we can keep figuring this stuff out together. Here's to retirement that's secure, fun, and full of the things that matter most. Take care, my friend.